Imagine you're a 28-year-old software engineer in Toronto. You make $85,000 a year. That's good money, right? You did everything right. You got the degree, landed the job, saved for years. You open your laptop to look at houses. A teardown. A literal condemned house with a caved-in roof just sold for $1.2 million. You refresh the page thinking it's a mistake. It's not. Welcome to Canada, where the American dream went to die and somehow got even more expensive. You aren't looking at a housing market anymore. You're looking at a Ponzi scheme with a maple leaf slapped on it. Here's a stat that should terrify you. In 1976, the average Canadian house cost 3.5 times the average household income. Today, it's over 9 times. In Toronto and Vancouver, it's 13 to 15 times. To put that in perspective, even at the peak of the 2008 US housing bubble, the ratio only hit 5.5. Canada has doubled the insanity of the worst financial crisis in modern history and just kept going. The entire Canadian economy isn't an economy anymore. It's a real estate casino where everyone is all in, the dealers, the government, and the house, pun intended, always wins, until it doesn't. Over the next 10 minutes, we're going to dissect the 4 pillars holding up the most spectacular housing bubble in the developed world, and why, when it falls, it's taking the entire country down with it. Buckle up. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to 2008. You remember 2008, right? The United States just blew up the global financial system with subprime mortgages. Lehman Brothers collapsed. The world was on fire. Canada, smug as always, looked south and said, "That would never happen here. We're too responsible." And technically they were right. Canadian banks didn't collapse. But here's what actually happened. While the US was letting its housing market crash and burn to purge the excess, Canada did the opposite. The Canadian government, terrified of a recession, decided to pump the housing market full of steroids. They slashed interest rates to nearly zero. They expanded mortgage insurance through CMHC. And here's the most insane part. They allowed 40-year mortgages. 40 years. You could take out a mortgage that wouldn't be paid off until your kids were middle-aged. This wasn't a free market. This was the government actively encouraging people to take on debt they couldn't afford. And it worked, too well. Between 2000 and 2020, the average Canadian home price increased by over 350%. Wages? They went up about 70%. Do the math. The gap between what people earn and what houses cost became a chasm. But here's where the trap snapped shut. In Canada, residential real estate and related industries now account for roughly 20% of GDP. 20%. The Canadian economy doesn't make things anymore. It doesn't innovate. It sells houses to each other at higher and higher prices and calls it growth. It's like a village where everyone gets rich by selling the same potato back and forth for twice the price every year. Eventually, someone is going to be holding a $10 million potato and realize they've been scammed. Once housing becomes 20% of your GDP, you can't let it crash. If housing prices fall by 30%, the entire economy collapses. The banks collapse, pensions collapse, consumer spending evaporates because Canadians have tied up 70% of their net worth in their homes. The government is now a hostage. They can't raise interest rates too much or the bubble pops. They can't stop the money flowing in because they need new buyers. They're stuck, and so are you. Okay, so the government is addicted to housing, but that doesn't fully explain how a regular house in Vancouver costs $2 million. For that, we need to talk about something the Canadian government desperately doesn't want you to know. Canada has become the money laundering capital of the Western world. Let's go to Vancouver. Beautiful city, mountains, ocean, incredible sushi. Also, the most unaffordable city in North America. In 2019, the Cullen Commission exposed what everyone already knew but nobody wanted to say out loud. Billions of dollars in dirty money from Chinese organized crime, Mexican cartels, and corrupt officials from around the world were being washed clean through Canadian real estate. Here's how it works. You're a corrupt billionaire in Beijing. You've embezzled $50 million and you need to get it out before the Communist Party notices. China has strict capital controls, so you use what's called the Vancouver model. You connect with underground banks. They give you cash in Vancouver. You buy a $5 million house, then you flip it to another shell company you control for $7 million. Congratulations. You just laundered $5 million and made a $2 million profit. The house price goes up. The government collects land transfer tax. The realtor gets a fat commission. Nobody asks questions. Between 2012 and 2018, it's estimated that over $47 billion in laundered money flowed into BC real estate alone. $47 billion. That's not a rounding error. That's systemic corruption. And it wasn't just Vancouver. Toronto, Montreal, Calgary all became hotspots for dirty money. The Canadian government knew, reports were written, investigations were launched, but nothing substantial changed. Why? Because stopping the money would mean crashing the market. So the government made a choice. They chose to protect housing prices over protecting affordability. They chose to let foreign criminals price out Canadian families because the alternative was admitting the whole thing was a scam. And when people protested, demanding a foreign buyer tax, you know what happened? They implemented a tiny 15% tax in Vancouver and Toronto. The criminals just started buying through Canadian shell companies and students with no declared income. Problem solved. The money kept flowing. Now, you might be thinking, dirty money explains Vancouver, but what about everywhere else? For that, we need to talk about immigration. And before the comments explode, this isn't anti-immigrant. This is about policy that's breaking the country. Canada has one of the most aggressive immigration policies in the developed world. In 2023, Canada brought in over 500,000 new permanent residents. The target? 500,000 per year through 2025. Canada's population is only 40 million. That means they're adding 1.25% to the population every single year through immigration alone. Now, immigration can be fantastic for an economy if you build the infrastructure to support it. If you build houses, schools, hospitals. Canada is doing the opposite. Canada is bringing in 500,000 people a year into a country that builds roughly 240,000 housing units per year. And half of those new people are landing in Toronto and Vancouver, cities already in crisis. It is mathematically impossible for supply to keep up with demand. Here's the dark truth. The government knows this. They're doing it on purpose. Why? Because new immigrants need housing. New immigrants push up demand. Demand pushes up prices. Rising prices keep the GDP numbers looking good. The Canadian economy is now a Ponzi scheme where you need a constant influx of new people to keep housing prices rising so that people who already own houses feel wealthy enough to keep spending. But here's the tragedy. Those new immigrants, the ones Canada is selling the dream to, they're getting scammed. They arrive expecting affordable housing and good jobs. Instead, they find themselves paying $2,500 a month to share a basement with 4 other people in Brampton. And the young Canadians, the ones born here, they're watching their own country become unaffordable in real time. They save up $50,000 for a down payment, and the house they were looking at is now $200,000 more expensive because the government just imported another wave of buyers. It's not the immigrants' fault. It's a government that decided GDP growth mattered more than the quality of life for its own citizens. So we've got government addiction, money laundering, and an immigration Ponzi. Surely the politicians will fix it, right? After all, affordable housing is a crisis. Every election, every party promises to make housing affordable again, and every single time they do nothing. Why? Because fixing the housing market means crashing the housing market, and crashing the housing market is political suicide. Here's the problem. Homeowners vote. And in Canada, roughly 66% of households own their homes. That means 2/3 of voters have a vested interest in housing prices staying high or going higher. If you're a politician and you say, we need housing prices to fall by 40%, you just lost the next election. Homeowners will destroy you. So politicians do what they do best. They lie. They announce tiny symbolic policies that sound good but do nothing. A first-time homebuyer credit, a small tax on vacant homes, a foreign buyer ban with more loopholes than Swiss cheese. It's all theater. No major political party in Canada actually wants housing to become affordable because affordability means lower prices. And lower prices mean their voter base loses wealth. The older generation, the boomers and Gen X, bought houses when they were cheap. A house they bought for $300,000 in 2005 is now worth $1.5 million. They feel rich. They vote to protect that wealth. Meanwhile, millennials and Gen Z are locked out entirely. The generational wealth gap in Canada is now a chasm, and it's creating a 2-tier society. Those who got in before 2010 and those who will never get in. But here's the thing about Ponzi schemes. They all collapse eventually. Right now, Canada is facing a perfect storm. Interest rates have gone up. The Bank of Canada raised rates aggressively to fight inflation. Mortgages that were 2% are now renewing at 6%. For $1 million mortgage, that's an extra $2,500 a month. Many Canadians simply can't afford it. We're already seeing the cracks. Mortgage delinquencies are rising. Households are maxing out credit cards just to make payments. Some are selling before they get foreclosed on. And immigration, the fuel for the Ponzi, is facing political backlash. Polls show that a majority of Canadians now want immigration reduced because of the housing crisis. If the government cuts immigration to appease voters, demand drops, prices fall, the Ponzi collapses. There are 2 possible futures here. Future A, the soft landing. The government somehow increases housing supply dramatically through zoning reform and actually building. Prices stabilize. Wages catch up over a decade. It's painful, but survivable. Future B, the crash. Interest rates stay high. Defaults spike. Prices fall 30 to 50%. Banks panic. The government bails them out. Regular Canadians lose everything. It's 2008, but with poutine and politeness. The tragic irony is that Canada had every advantage. Stable government, abundant resources, educated population. And they squandered it all by turning the entire economy into a real estate scam. They chose short-term GDP growth over long-term stability. They chose to enrich one generation at the expense of the next, and now the bill is coming due. Here's the lesson. When a country ties its entire economic identity to one asset class, when the government becomes dependent on rising prices to function, when fraud is tolerated because the alternative is collapse, you're not looking at an economy, you're looking at a bubble, and all bubbles pop. I don't want Canada to fail. But the math doesn't care about intentions. If you found this breakdown alarming, good. That means you're paying attention. Hit that subscribe button because when this bubble pops, and it will, you'll want to understand why. And if you think Canada is bad, wait until you see our next video on Australia's housing crisis. They make Canada look responsible. I'll see you in the next one.